think the immune system is the link between physical health and mental health. There may be a subset of people with poor mental health who can be helped by anti-inflammatory strategies.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of 80% Mental, a podcast all about the psychology of sport and performance. Although to be honest, it's about whatever I want it to be, which is a good job, because this series we're talking about the psychology behind exercise and health and well-being and how we can learn some lessons from the psychology underpinning those things and take them into our own lives a little bit more. Leah may or may not be joining us this episode. We're having some technical microphone difficulties, but we'll see where we get to. But I want to welcome our first guest for today, our only guest for today, Dr. Jenna Macciochi. And Dr. Jenna Macciochi is an immunologist. She understands how nutrition, movement, and lifestyle interact with the immune system in health and disease. Based in Brighton, Jenna is a senior lecturer at the University of Sussex, a fitness instructor, and author of 2 books, Immunity, The Science of Staying Well, and Your Blueprint for Strong Immunity. Jenna, welcome to 80% Mental.
Thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
No, can't wait. How's your morning been?
It's been good, actually. Today's a bit of a work from home day. So yeah, doing a bit of catching up on all things emails and planning and preparing for next week.
Yeah, oh, fantastic. Well, the topic for today is all about the immune system and our immune function. And we know that there's a bit of a link there to our mental health. And hopefully we'll get into some of that a little bit later on in the episode. But I kind of want to start with just talking about what our immune system really is. Like, I love the internet. Like, the internet's brilliant, but it's also full of people telling me that I need to boost my immune system, that I need to restart my immune system, that I need to take my immune system on a lovely weekend break for 2. But, so like the internet's great, but it's also full of dubious material. So I guess it would be really useful if you could just explain, before we start the episode proper, like what my immune system actually is.
Yeah, I think it's a really good place to start. And like you say, there's a lot of kind of oversimplification of the immune system online. And it's quite hard to conceptualize the immune system because unlike other systems in our body, like, the digestive system, you kind of know where that is in space and time. You have a sense of where your digestive tract is, what it's doing, and it, gives you some feedback now and again. So you are reminded to keep it happy. But the immune system is one of those systems that's sort of dispersed throughout the body. So it doesn't have a kind of one anatomical home. And it's this big network of different cells, organ tissues, and the lymphatic system, which is a bit like our blood circulatory system, but specifically to help your immune cells move around. And it's all over the body. And there's a good reason for that because it's there as a primary defense against infections. And infections are all around us in our environment, and there are different places where they're going to try and get in. Breathing, our lungs, we have to make sure that they're okay to get oxygen from the air, which means they have this really delicate structure, but that also makes them vulnerable to infections, who will see that as an opportunity to get in our body. The digestive tract is obviously another route where things can get in. Also, just our skin barrier. So, there's lots of ways that things can get in our body, and our immune system is there to sort of fortify those barriers and keep things out. So it'll be dispersed throughout our body. It's a combination of cells, organs, tissues, and the lymphatic system. And we talk a lot about it as an infection protection system. And I think that's probably because the field of immunology kind of branched off of microbiology, its sort of older sibling, where, we discovered that microbes were the cause of making us sick. Before we could visualize microbes under a microscope, people used to talk about my asthma like bad air that made us sick. Nobody knew
Yeah.
why, because we couldn't see those viruses and bacteria. And so immunology kind of branched off of microbiology when we discovered that if you are missing one or other of these immune cells in your body, you're more vulnerable to specific infections. So we do tend to think about it in terms of infection protection, but I like to think about it as kind of more broadly our wellness system, because I think it does so much more than just protect us from infections. And it's really intermeshed with all the other systems in the body. It's really working together with your metabolism, for example. It works together with the brain and your senses, because the immune system is also a sensing system. It has to be prepared for things. And it's really important for your longevity. It can go wrong. It can lead to things like allergies and autoimmune diseases. And so it's kind of, to me, a really beautiful, amazing system that I just feel like we have so much more to learn and understand. It's like the gift that keeps on giving.
So it's a lot more complex than one Instagram slide telling you that you need to take care of it. So this kind of really complex system that's made up of quite a lot of different things. And, I liked what you said there about it being more than just a defense system, referring to it as almost like a wellness system. You touched on quite a few things there, and I wonder if you could just maybe spell out a little bit more. What are some of the real benefits of having a healthy immune system?
Yeah, so infection is the obvious one. I
Yeah.
think infections are, we've evolved with germs in our environment, and it's normal to get sick a couple of times a year, particularly if you're exposed to other people, because that's how germs transfer from one person to another. So as much as when we do get sick, we can say, oh God, I've got such a terrible immune system, but actually it's quite normal. But thinking about how sick we get, how we recover, and the frequency of illness, I think those are kind of really important things to keep in our mind. Other benefits of having a healthy immune system, it means our metabolic health is going to be benefiting from that, because the immune system is very energy intensive. So when it's doing things it like fighting off a virus or eliciting sort of unwanted inflammation because something's triggered it, then it's tapping into the metabolism, sort of triaging energy and resources away from other areas of the body. So the body will sort of prioritize the immune system above other areas. So that can sort of leave us falling short. Also things like injury, a few years ago, I broke my arm. I didn't have any infection, that the skin wasn't broken. There was not like bacteria that my body was fighting, but my immune system was repairing that bone and all the soft tissue around it. So that's really important to remember, that it's there to sort of remodel and keep our tissues and the structural parts of our body intact. And then also pregnancy, you have this whole remodeling that's going on with the growing baby, and the immune system's really there helping your body to establish that synergy between the baby, which is genetically going to have some components that are different to yourself, and stopping your body sort of rejecting that, because intrinsically our bodies reject things that are genetically foreign to us. Mm-hmm. So the immune system is really guiding that pregnancy. And then obviously once a child is born, that remodeling that's required to allow the child to grow is all down to different cells of your immune system.
Okay, so lots and lots of kind of really tangible benefits there in terms of us, perhaps physical health and physical well-being. But I guess what I wanted to talk about on this podcast, because obviously 80% mental, is the link between our immune system and maybe our mental health. Like, is there any truth, for example, to the old adage, healthy body, healthy mind? Is there a link there between, immune and mental health?
I feel like the immune system is the link between the physical health and the mental health. The immune system is, as I see it, just looking for all these different data streams all the time. So things that you're exposed to, infections that you might encounter, things like your nutrition, your exercise, the type of kind of stressors that you're exposed to in your daily life. And it's computing all that and then deciding how best to respond. And sometimes in a really complex system like the immune system, that response goes wrong, and your immune system will emit sort of what I like to call unwanted inflammation. So it uses inflammation to remove things like viruses and bacteria that's infecting us, but sometimes it starts emitting inflammation when it doesn't need to. And that inflammation is therefore not beneficial to us. It causes some collateral damage to our cells and tissues. And I feel like this unwanted inflammation is a really important link between our body and our brain, because we know that in the case of when you are infected with something, think about the last time you had the flu, you probably felt socially withdrawn, you probably felt a bit depressed, you had changes to appetite, motivation, the drive to do things, and all of these are what we call sickness behaviors. So because your body's fighting that infection, it's elicited inflammation to make that germ really uncomfortable, and that has a knock-on effect on what you're doing cognitively and how you feel mentally, to try and help you get well quickly. Because if we continue with our daily life and we run around going to the gym and being busy, well, that's not going to allow us to have the energy to recover from the infection. So we get these sickness behaviors. So it's driven by the inflammation that your immune system's eliciting, and it's there. It's evolutionarily we've got this to help us get well again. But if you imagine when you have that unwanted inflammation happening in the body, that then is going to have an impact on and driving those kind of behaviors as well. And this is something that's really kind of came out of the literature in probably the last 5 or 10 years, is that we're now seeing that there may be a subset of people with poor mental health who can be helped by anti-inflammatory strategies, because it's been driven by that unwanted inflammation, and whether that's specific anti-inflammatory medications or diet or lifestyle factors. And I think it's just opening up this whole new world, because there's so many people that I speak to with chronic inflammatory diseases. And one of the first diseases where this was looked at was people with rheumatoid arthritis. Everyone thought they were depressed because they'd been given this diagnosis of rheumatoid arthritis. But actually what they found was that because of the inflammation associated with their disease, having that impact on the brain and the behaviors, that was what was making them feel depressed. And so when you get the inflammation under control, they felt better. And so to me, it's like, it blows my mind when I think about this link.
No, that's incredible. And, just to kind of go back a step, you're talking about these sickness behaviors. I wonder, can you give us some examples of the sorts of things that you mean? Because I think of the ways that I behave when I'm sick. And there's a lot of moaning and whining.
Yeah,
and lethargy. What kind of things do you mean by sickness behaviors?
Yeah, I mean, there's a sort of defined list, I guess, in the medical literature, but it is things like that, like the lethargy, that extreme tiredness. You might have changes to sleep, so you feel more tired, but your sleep might be more disturbed, because we know the effect of inflammation can disturb the natural cycles of our sleep. Appetite changes, so this is something that people commonly experience. I feel like social withdrawal is something that is a real common one. So not wanting to engage with your normal activities, to engage with other people. And whether that's, evolutionarily, we're trying not to spread our infection, assuming that inflammation was associated with being infected. You want to take yourself out from the pack so that you're not passing it on to people. And sort of feeling low mood. So that's another sickness behavior that's commonly reported. So if we think about it, it makes sense if you've got an infection, because if you're tired, you're going to try and conserve energy. And as I mentioned, the immune system is this really energetically demanding system. So it needs all that energy and resource to be able to fight the infection and get you well. But then if we put it in a sort of modern context where you might have low level unwanted inflammation because of various factors, in your diet and lifestyle, then that's going to show up in daily life. That low mood, the lethargy that you can't seem to shake, the social withdrawal, and then it has that kind of negative cycle, because we know that there's lots of things that are good for our body that we're not able to do. You're not going to feel like going out and getting exercise, getting into green space, seeing friends, like all of those lovely nurturing inputs that we need for our health. And that kind of sends that negative cycle off.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. You know, when again, we're thinking about times when I'm ill, not feeling very well, that not being able to go and get my exercise in, like it kind of makes it feel worse. So
Yeah.
incessant complaining maybe isn't on the official list of sickness behaviors, but certainly maybe a result of some of those other sickness behaviors that you're describing there. And I guess the other thing is that we know that there's perhaps a link that works the other way around as well. So whilst immune function might have an impact on our mental health, actually we know that, for example, being really stressed has an impact on our immune function. So can you tell me about some of those things, some of the ways it works that way around?
Yeah, you're right. It's definitely a two-way street and the traffic's flowing both ways. And I see the immune system as a sensing system because it has to sense, danger or things that it has to prepare for. And obviously our brain is very much a sensing system. It's there computing all this information, what we're seeing, hearing, thinking, feeling, all of those different inputs are then going to have to be translated to the immune system because it's going to have to know if there's something it needs to prepare for. So there's definitely that. And there's an emerging literature looking at the different neurotransmitters and how they're having that sort of imprinting onto our immune system. But I feel like, from my understanding anyway, we're not quite fully there with being able to just say, thinking this way is having that effect.
Yeah.
Perhaps that's an area I think that we're going to see a lot more understanding of in the near future. But stress is certainly a key one where it's been really highly studied. And I think I can't think of someone I know who's not stressed to a certain degree, because modern life is quite stressful, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's the small things, it's the big things, it's the whole picture put together. And obviously we know that stress has a particular biochemical signal in the body. If you imagine that you accidentally step out on the street and there's a bus that's just come around a corner, it's about to hit you, you need to have some way to mobilize yourself to safety. And so you're getting that sudden rush of adrenaline to mobilize sugar into your blood to give you energy. You're laser focused, you're sprinting to safety, and that's all happening in this really short acute time. And so actually in the short term, that stress response primes your immune system for action. So it's kind of having a sort of heightening response. It's making it better.
A fight, flight, freeze response, isn't it? Yeah.
Exactly. It's like, well, if I get hit by the bus, I'm going to have some injury. I'm going to need to repair that. So this short-term stress response actually makes your immune system super sharp and you're like ready, prepared for everything. But then over time, the cortisol response comes and that's dampening down the immune system. And if anyone's ever had any kind of inflammatory issue, you might have been prescribed some kind of cortisone-based drug, whether that's something like a hydrocortisone cream for, a skin inflammation. And it's like magic, you rub it on and then whatever, if that's eczema or something, psoriasis, it's like magic, it's disappearing. And that's because your immune cells have receptors on their surface for that cortisol, and it's basically just turning them off and saying, okay, shut down this response.
Okay.
So, we get that cortisol effect on our immune system over time is then leaving us really open to, not just infections, but all the things we mentioned earlier that, the immune system's so important to govern over so many aspects of our well-being.
This is the 80% Mental Podcast, and I'm here with Dr. Jenna Macciochi, and we've just been talking about our immune system, what our immune system is. It's a system of defense, but it's also a system of wellness. There's a real clear link between our immune system and our physical health, but also our mental health as well. Jenna, I wonder if we can talk a little bit now about how to take care of our immune system. again, the internet's full of wonderful advice, but what are some of the ways that you might encourage somebody or advise somebody to perhaps take care of their immune system?
Yeah, I think that's it's important when we go to social media and we see all this advice. It's important to be, cast a critical eye, and it is such a complex system. So there's never going to be a single one size fits all solution. There's never going to be some, these 5 foods to boost your immune system. Like, it just doesn't work that way. And I think if people start to see it as your immune system looking for all these different data streams coming from all different areas of your life, then, you have all these little dials in front of you and you start to think, okay, I'm going to try and pump them up. And, we can take your sort of genetic basis of which will have an impact on how your immune system functions, because we inherit our immune system genes from our parents. And this is quite interesting because they're inherited in a way that we get sorry, doorbell.
Someone's at the front door.
It's all right. You can go and answer the door if you want.
Oh no, it's fine. I'll just try and.
That's an impressive doorbell, by the way.
It's like a Google doorbell, I think. So we start to think of it as all these little inputs that we need and lay it out as little dials in front of us. We can start to tweak each one carefully. And it's important to remember that we do have a sort of genetic basis for our immune system. We inherit our immune system genes from our parents. Now, unlike how we inherit the other genes in our body, we inherit one gene from our mother, one gene from our father, and you have obviously 2 copies. But for other things, you might inherit both from your mother or both from your father. But the immune system has got this system where you're getting a part from each. This helps make us genetically more different from our parents in terms of our immune system. And this is trying to increase our chances of, our defense against infections. So you want to be as diverse immunologically as possible, because the more diverse we are at the population level, the more chance we have of fighting off infections and not dying out as a species. If you imagine, if you have we're all genetically very, very similar. You drop some new virus on us that wipes out most of the population, then you need some people that are genetically different enough that they can fight it off so they can repopulate us. So this is kind of built into our evolution. So you have your genetic basis, and then you have all the kind of lifestyle-y stuff that layers on top. And we can think of those as the little dials that we want to tweak to try and make sure our immune system has all of the right inputs to function best. So diet is obviously really important, and people like to concentrate it down to supplements, and we can definitely talk about supplements, but we
will talk about supplements. Yeah.
You can argue that a deficiency in any of the essential vitamins or minerals is going to have an impact on how your immune system functions. And it's not just the vitamins and minerals, but it's also the macronutrients. Carbohydrates are really, really important in providing a fuel source. Protein is not only providing the building blocks, but the different amino acids have specific signaling properties within the immune system. And then the composition of fats in our diet, there's certain fats that are really important to have. So the omega-3s become part of the membrane of our immune cells. And we use these as kind of anti-inflammatory signals. So they help resolve inflammation at the end of an immune response and shut it down and bring everything back to homeostasis. So the diet as a whole, and I think we need to move away from the sort of 3 or 4 superfoods and go where the literature is going, in that it's the dietary pattern that's really important. So basically just the foods you habitually eat over time. And to me, that makes a lot more sense, and it feels more intuitive and flexible. So if you do go out and have a meal that's considered maybe of a poorer diet quality, it doesn't matter so much as long as the overall pattern is there. And I think that's what people need to aim for, rather than perfect meals, thinking about the quality of the pattern that you have across the weeks and months.
So me just kind of caning beetroot non-stop all day, it's not really going to do that much good, is it?
Yeah, it might. The beetroot loving microbes in your gut might be super happy, but there'll be other parts that are craving something else.
And Leah's here. Is your microphone working?
Hello.
She's here. Brilliant. How are we doing, Leah?
Great now.
Stressy start to the day for you.
It's so early.
Yeah, Leah's in that America that they have there. So it's really early in the morning, and I appreciate you being all stressy with your microphone and getting through that and joining us. So, Jenna, you've just been talking about these kind of dials that you can turn up and turn down, and sort of diet's one of them. What are some of the others? Like, you talk a lot about exercise and movement as being really beneficial. I wonder if you could talk to us about that a little bit.
Yeah, and it's like a personal an area that I'm sort of personally interested in, as somebody who loves just to move and move in lots of different ways.
Hmm.
And I think exercise is a real key input for our immune system that people don't often recognize. They don't often think that that's an important thing. You know, you go into winter and there's more coughs and colds and they're thinking, oh, I need to take my vitamin C or my vitamin D, but they don't think about how much movement they're getting as being part of that picture as well, in terms of how they stay well across winter. So if we just take a kind of top line view, it's really about moving more often, moving in lots of different ways. So we know, generally speaking, that people who perform well in something like a functional movement score, so they're able to get into different range of motion, have a decent amount of muscle mass, a good cardiorespiratory fitness, they tend to have a better protection from infection. They have better levels of different immune markers when we start to measure those in the body. So just being a kind of all-round mover is really, really important. The cardiovascular side is going to really help with moving that lymphatic flow, because the lymph system doesn't have the benefit of the heart pumping to move that fluid around. And this helps with surveillance. So your immune system is always trying to patrol the body, looking out for anything untoward. And that's not just infections, but also it's the main cancer surveillance system. So it's looking out for any cells that have transformed potentially down the route of becoming a cancer, and it's able to jump on that early. So just getting that lymphatic flow going with the cardiovascular movement, walking, running, cycling, swimming, whatever it is that you enjoy doing. That's also in that sort of, it's acutely inflammatory, but broadly anti-inflammatory. So you get an acute inflammation during the exercise that then leads to this anti-inflammatory calming response, which has sort of more broader benefits. So it's really important on that front. And my particular interest has grown out of some work looking at immune aging, because we know as people get older, one of the things that can lead to really poor health is that they get this immune senescence. Their immune systems become poorer at doing their job. Then you become more frail, more vulnerable to illness. And the minute older people end up in hospital, then, they start to be more immobile, they lose muscle mass, and you get into a real vicious cycle. And so the immune age is something that I found really interesting to explore. And what we know now is that the immune age isn't necessarily tracking to your chronological age. And one of the biggest levers to have a younger immune age as you get older is exercise, and particularly maintaining muscle mass. And so we know that loss of muscle mass is a really big issue. I mean, it can start in your 30s and 40s. If you're not using that muscle, you're losing it. But if you are someone who takes care of your muscle mass into those, 60, 70, 80 years, then the muscles are producing things we call them myokines. It's just the term for a particular communication molecule that then stops this immune senescence. It mitigates the immune aging somewhat. So you can have a really active, healthy 70, 80-year-old with an immune system that has an age of, a 30-year-old, or you can have a 30-year-old who's really sedentary and has an immune age of much older. So I just think this idea of how we can, think about living well into our old years really boils down to looking after that muscle mass. And the only way we can do that really is by using it, because muscle is quite expensive for our bodies to hold on to. And if we're not using it, it's going to get rid of it. And I think, all of the data speaks to the fact that as we get older, particularly from the midlife time, we just, movement gets squeezed out of our days. A lot of our jobs are very sedentary. And when we're not on those sedentary jobs, where maybe running around with small kids or aging parents, or just trying to keep on the treadmill of life, and then you just collapse at the end of the day. And perhaps there have been lots of times where you've been really sedentary. Perhaps you've stopped using your body in its full range of motion, and you start to see that as the decades then stack up. And so to me it's like inspiring people when they're younger to make sure that they can prevent that age-related muscle loss, but also talking to people who are older and saying it's not too late to start doing some resistance exercise. And even in the government guidance, I think it's so many minutes of cardiovascular a week, getting the heart rate up, and then 2 muscle strengthening sessions per week, which I don't know that anyone's aware of. I feel like it plays second fiddle to cardiovascular fitness. And so we really need to have more awareness, and also for people who've never been in a gym before, like never lifted weights before, or don't even know what the term resistance exercise means. Like, someone who's maybe 65 and has suddenly decided they want to start looking into taking care of their body and doing resistance exercise. How do we help them?
Yeah.
And how do we get them, to integrate that into their, daily life?
A couple of things. And first of all, I've got to shout out Dave Hembrough here. So Dave Hembrough is a colleague of mine who works at Sheffield Hallam. And I've talked about this program on the podcast before, but he runs a program called Mindfully Strong, which is all about integrating mindfulness and strength training for older adults.
Ooh,
and it's such a brilliant way of exercising that's so different. It's the antithesis of all of this kind of stuff that, again, you see on Instagram. This, you have to get in the gym and you have to do this. This the total antithesis of that. And he says that after a training session, a resistance training session, it should feel like you've just had a nice warm bath or a hug.
Oh, nice.
Which is a really nice way of looking at it. So shout out to Dave Hembrough. Go and check out Metal. I'll put a link in the episode description if you want to check out some of the other programs that he's got going on. But the other thing is that I do a lot of strength training. Leah, I know you get in the gym quite a lot as well, right?
Yeah.
And I'm 45 now. And about every 6 months or so, I go through this phase of thinking, right, at some point, I'm just going to stop doing this and just get old and fat because I can't be bothered anymore. But what you're saying is actually there's some real benefits to just continuing, just moving heavy things, lifting things that will sort of see me through into to older adulthood.
Yeah, definitely. I think build your bank account now, and your future self will thank you for that. So keep lifting the heavy things.
Well, I think it's really interesting, like you said, that, we do often focus on just the cardio of like, go for a walk and do all these things. And those typically feel like the most accessible.
Yeah.
Right? Just go outside or just whatever. But, and a lot of people aren't aware of like that 2 days a week of resistance training. And I think also the other part of that is, in particularly when we look at older adults, they feel like that's just a world that's not accessible to them at all.
Mm-hmm.
We don't always talk about how adaptable our bodies are, that just because you've never lifted a weight in your whole life or you've never done resistance training in your whole life doesn't mean you never can.
Yeah.
And that even if you are, because I think there are like a lot of older adults out there who are like, oh, well, that's passed me by. Like, that's just, that's not for me because I'm old. And it's like, no, it is for you because you are older. Like, that's the whole thing, is like, just as your body will adapt to being sedentary, your body will absolutely adapt to the resistance and very quickly and rapidly. And, I used to teach weight training and would occasionally have an older student and they'd be like, I don't know if this is for me. And I'm like, listen, girl, push-ups are going to change your whole life. Like, I promise you, like, when you can pick up a box at the end of the semester, or you can move like your desk or something, like, you're going to think 3 months ago, I couldn't do this. And it's not only from a like physical standpoint, but it's so empowering, and you feel so accomplished from it.
Yeah, no, 100%. It was 3 years ago. I was cycling home from work and I was hit by a car and I broke my arm. And so it was a shoulder joint. So the whole arm was immobilized for 3 months. And when I took it out of this thing and I hadn't used it for 3 months, like it had just shrunk. Like it was just, I had this weird, like skinny arm and I couldn't lift it up. Like I couldn't, if I wanted to grab something off of a high shelf, I couldn't lift it up. And I was just like, that's what happens if you don't keep giving your body the message that it needs to have that strength, that range of motion, that, it will just disappear. And so that was for me like a kind of, I need to take control of this. It was during lockdown and so there wasn't any opportunity to do any physio or anything, but I used to get up every morning and just do really, really small things to try and get my shoulder to sort of release up and build the strength again. But it was only by painstaking, 30 minutes a day of just doing these tiny, tiny movements that, I got back my strength and some since that. But it was, it's like a journey of years. It's really frustrating. And it's really like, it takes a lot of like mental will, I think, to do that. And you can see why people do feel overwhelmed, especially if they've never even set foot in a gym or it's a world that seems not for them. It's just like, yeah, a lot.
And even beyond just the actual, avoiding sarcopenia or the gaining strength, like particularly for older adults, when we look at things like nerve conduction velocity and their ability to, if they do stumble, right, that that ability to be able to stop them from falling, stop themselves from falling, like is such a massive, benefit to weight training in that their nerve conduction velocity is quick enough to catch them, right? And you're not going to get that if you are sedentary.
Yeah. The funny thing was when I broke my arm, they said it was like the classic old lady injury because it was the front of my shoulder. And they said that old ladies, if they fall, or old people, I guess, generally, if they fall forward, they can't put their hands out quick enough to catch themselves. So just as you were saying, and so they fall on the front of the shoulder. So I think that thinking about the muscle fibers, hanging on to the fast twitch and being able to have those explosive movements that can save us is really critical. Because once you're, laid up, and if you're a lot, older than I was when I had this injury, say you break a leg or something, that strength is just going to disappear, and the rehabilitation is so challenging that you have to build that up as much as you can, as young as you can.
So this is the 80% Mental Podcast. I'm Dr. Pete Olusoga with Leah Washington, Dr. Leah Washington, and we're here with Dr. Jenna Macciochi talking about our immune system and the links between mental health and our immune function. It's been a really fascinating conversation so far. If you've enjoyed it, you can get in touch, leave us a review, leave a comment. We're on Instagram at 80% Mental. We're on Twitter at EPM Podcast, and you can go to our website, 80percentmental.com, where you can listen to all of our other episodes and subscribe for more world-class content. Jenna, just before the break there, you were talking about, when you broke your own arm, and you're saying that there's a lot of sort of willpower and perseverance involved in trying to maintain that routine, that sort of getting up and doing a little bit of exercise and doing a little bit of strength training. I'm really interested because, maintaining a healthy immune system in a lot of ways and looking after our immune system is about behavior change. Mm-hmm. And I just wonder if you could talk about maybe some of the ways that you found psychology to be really important or really helpful here, in terms of things like making those dietary changes or breaking some of those habits or adopting more healthy habits. What are some of the things that you might find useful drawing on psychology in that area?
I mean, I think at a certain point, I just realized that health was part immunology, part psychology. If we think of our immune system as the wellness system, then you need the psychology to be able to direct that that system. I think if I was to go and study again, I would probably study psychology, because I think it's fascinating. And you know, it's where there's a missing link, isn't there? We have all this public health guidance, for example, but then, you know, it's something like 5% of the population actually take up the Eat Well plate, which is sort of government, you know, dietary guidelines. So it just blows my mind that there's this big disconnect. Yet, you know, if you go on social media, everyone's doing the latest like fancy, you know, diet hack that they've read online is going to bring them, you know, all of this health and well-being. Yeah. It's just kind of, I don't know, a weird thing about the human condition. And I think anything that I've learned about the immune system, it all boils down to behavior change, because people actually have to find a way to employ these things in their daily life. And so I think from dipping my toe in that area, obviously I'm not a psychologist, I'm just kind of coming at it as an outsider with an interest in it. I found really helpful for my own experience, just in making changes, and, you know, little things like habits and how, you know, we are the product of our habits, and thinking about, well, if I'm stuck in this negative loop, I just need to maybe employ a short-term kind of intervention where I break the loop, and it will feel quite painful and quite sticky, but that over time it will become more intuitive, and I'll do it without thinking about it. And I think it's like, if we imagine when we learn something new, like if you start learning a language, it's like, it's clunky, it's sticky, it's painful, it's like, oh, it's just not really coming together. But if you keep at it, then those patterns become really well established in your brain, and the fluency builds up. And so I like to think of it as that. If I want to introduce a little habit, it is the, you know, if I want to go for a workout every morning before my kids wake up, it's like just getting the pattern of getting up, laying everything out so I don't have to think about it, removing all those layers of friction wherever possible, and just knowing that the science is in the compliance, like give it time, give it time, give it time. The experience I had with breaking my own arm was really formative, because that was a very long and slow process, but it meant I got the use of my arm back. Because the thought of not being able to use my arm was so overpowering. But if we break it down into even smaller things, then it's just like, just keep being consistent, you can't see the immediate change, but it's all working towards the same goal.
I always think of it as like, changing behavior is like when you change your password on your computer. Like the first time, like the first 17 times you do it, you type the old password, and then you have to like, and then you type you get like halfway through the password, and then you have to like backspace, but nope, we're not doing that. We did change it. And then like, eventually it becomes your new password becomes like, you don't think about it anymore. And like every kind, like there's always like stops and starts and stops and starts. And it's always interesting to me when we think about behavior change that we assume that we're just going to change the behavior. And if we don't, and if the behavior doesn't like immediately change, that we're doing something wrong, and that we don't always like account or allow for those stops and starts and fits and starts of like, you're going to fuck it up for a couple times, and that's fine. Like, you know, like you'll get there eventually, but for whatever reason, like, it's like, oh, if I, you know, didn't do it immediately, then I'm a complete failure. And it's like, no, you did it. And then like, we'll just get back to it and it's fine. But like, you kind of just have, like you said, the sciences and the compliance, you just have to like keep doing it and get back to it. And if eventually it'll be there.
Yeah. And I think thinking of the long road, I mean, just from all the research I've done around the immune system, I just became quite fascinated about the sort of long-term game plan, like wanting to be fit and well when I was the same age as my grandfather in his 90s, who's, you know, just doing really crazy active things and then able to engage in all the stuff that gives him a lot of pleasure. And thinking, well, then, you know, it's not about what I achieve in the next month on some sort of extreme, you know, diet or exercise plan. It's really about where is the little changes taking me. And instead of, if I've got 6 dials in front of me, I've got my diet, my exercise, my sleep, my stress, my gut health, whatever else it is. Instead of trying to turn them all up at once, I'm just feeling a bit overwhelmed and paralyzed, because I'm also like, I'm a working mom, and that just throws up the unexpected, and then it all falls apart, and then you get in that negative cycle of feeling, well, I'm disappointed in myself because I couldn't do all these things I wanted to do. Let's just take one dial and let's just crank it up a few notches until that comes really embedded in my, day-to-day, week-to-week life. And then let's work on something else. And I found personally that worked really well, but it took a kind of retraining of my own brain away from that wanting, something immediate. And also thinking of it as, like a pyramid, where on the bottom you've got all the core fundamentals that your immune system needs to feel well. So that is, like having a healthy diet pattern, the regular exercise, the good sleep, having tools in your toolbox to mitigate the inevitable stresses, working on all that. And then the next layer up of the triangle is the personalization. So are there specific areas that you're a bit more concerned about or struggling with, and what can you put into to help support? Because things change across the lifespan, like where you might need a bit of extra support. And then at the top, it's like the 1%ers. It's the little sprinkles on top that are really nice to have, but you need to have those foundations in place. So I think it's I feel like we have a big education piece to do with the general public to sort of bring them on this journey with us, and try and help them look at it from like a long-term standpoint, and sort of define wellness a bit more as sort of just the process that gets you to have a well life and do the things you love, and separate to a specific health goal that you want to achieve in a matter of weeks or months.
I think we also overcomplicate things a lot of times. Like, no, it really is like, go to bed on time, eat lunch, drink water, go outside. Like, it's like we try to make, I gotta get my macros in, and I gotta do. It's like, no, just eat a fucking apple. Like, it's fine. Like, it's fine. It doesn't need to be more than what it is.
Yeah. I mean, speaking of being more than what it is, I saw something literally this morning I was scrolling through Instagram, and I saw something about forest bathing. Forest bathing. Have a guess what forest bathing is?
I feel like it would be nice to be a bathtub in the middle of a forest, but it's not.
just going outside.
Yeah.
Obviously, like going in nature, going to a park, going to a forest, taking a walk outside in nature. But we don't need to overcomplicate it and call it something ridiculous.
Well, it's not a life hack. It's like opening your front door.
Just go outside. But what's interesting here, though, is you mentioned about barriers earlier on, Jenna, I think, and interesting. You just talked about that kind of pyramid structure of kind of what's the sort of foundational elements and the education piece. I think it would be remiss of us to not talk about some of the barriers to maintaining a healthy immune system, because some of those factors, for a lot of people, are genuinely outside of their control. So we know, for example, there's a link between things like socioeconomic status, affluence, stress. More likely to experience stress in lower income households, areas with high poverty. A lot of wellness influencers, if you want to use that word, their advice is aimed at people who have no kids, disposable income, access to facilities, time, space. How can wellness influencers, I don't know if you have any ideas about this, how can they be more inclusive in their practice and in their advice and in their messaging?
Yeah, it's really challenging, isn't it? And it's something that kind of makes my skin feel a bit like on social media, because it sometimes feels like a fine line to feeding into that versus sort of keeping a perspective on the bigger picture. And I think it's great now that we have more and more research that is really giving us that empirical data on the link between things like you said, like socioeconomic status, and even just access to fresh fruit and veg in the areas that have lower socioeconomic status, and things like basic cooking skills. And we start to lose that over the generations. So if someone isn't taught to cook, by their parent, then, if you are coming home from a long, stressful, busy day and you have a limited budget and you could go into a shop and buy all the raw materials to make a delicious meal. So, a bag of carrots is really cheap and whatever. But if you get home and you have not got, you're already tired from a day at work, but you haven't been given the basic cookery skills to know what to do to turn that into something delicious, then you're not going to go for that option. You're probably going to go to one of the fast food outlets that are offering something warm and comforting and fast and doesn't require any preparation. So I think it's something that we have a lot of work to do. Even things like shift workers, the immune system works on a circadian rhythm. It functions differently during the day versus during the night. That's purely because, during the day we're meant to be out and about, where we have a higher chance of coming into contact with germs. And then during the night is when we're sort of dealing with any germs, doing a bit of housekeeping. So there's kind of different states of the immune system. And when we swap that, when we have a shift worker, we know that can be associated with lots of different health issues downstream. What can we do to try and protect shift workers? And we're not just talking doctors and nurses, but there's a whole bunch of different roles, and a lot of those are the real minimum wage jobs to help protect them as well. I think the big answer is I'm not sure, but I think we can all collectively put a voice behind that and start to look at breaking down the barriers that we know are present. And as I said, now we have data to identify those.
I think this is also this is a hill that I often die on, in my class when I teach my exercise science students. I'm like, if you have an interest in public policy, there are not enough people who have an exercise background in public health and making public health decisions. And so
sorry,
I love that doorbell.
Sorry, Leah.
And so having someone with a strong exercise foundation who can inform public policy, I think any exercise people out there, any people who are interested in kinesiology and all of these things, go into public policy, because this is where we can start to influence things like limiting the amount of shifts that you are required to work in a given period of time, or making sure, thinking about the built environment and having that ability to walk to places and have accessible parks, or where we can fundamentally integrate activity into our lives in a much easier way, and to limit some of those things like you mentioned before of that are going to negatively impact our immune system. I really do believe that if we have more people who are making decisions who have an exercise background, it's always the part that I think is oh yeah, super important. And then it kind of doesn't, we have all these guidelines of, yes, 150 minutes a day and 2 days a week of strength training and whatever, but we don't create environments that support that.
Yeah, we need to build it in somehow more. Even things, I think a lot about schools. And I've got 9-year-old twins, and I think about, we're kind of priming them to sit in chairs and become chair shaped, and I think about their posture and everything. We need to. That's a real opportunity to access a whole, generation of children to try and break some of the cycles for their future.
And even when we think about kids in school, right, and having that unstructured playtime, and not just the benefits that they get in terms of the ability to stay in school, or to sit through class, or to problem solve, and all of those things that the positive things that unstructured play provides. But from an immunology standpoint, there are germs everywhere in school. And if we want to minimize kids' absences, and we want to minimize the ability, just being sick in school, exercise is a real benefit to that. And I don't think we often appreciate the value that having that activity time can bring in terms of just keeping kids in school.
Yeah, exactly. Definitely getting time outside. There's a really interesting study, I think it came out of somewhere in Scandinavia, looking at daycares, and when they gave the kids in daycare more time outside in the enriched the outside space with green space and mud, and the kids then could go and dig in the dirt and do that, and they looked at the actual changes in different parameters of their immune system over time. They found that exposure to the green space, which I suppose is your forest bathing,
forest bathing, right? Tell me,
did improve parameters of the immune system. They were specifically interested in the other side of it, so preventing things like allergies, which we know is a growing problem. And the mechanism was through the exposure to the microbes in those green environments, because, we're breathing them in and we're swallowing them, and they're having a beneficial effect on our own microbiome in our gut, which is a big educator of our immune system. So I think being able to have kids get a lot of access to green space, I think that's going to have really important benefits and hopefully give their immune system that resilience against things like infections, but also allergies that will take them into their adult life.
Yeah. I want to touch briefly, we mentioned it before, but I want to touch briefly on supplements. And I'm very aware that this is a rabbit hole that we could go down, which could lead to an hour-long conversation at least. So keeping it fairly brief, because I'm keeping an eye on the clock here. Talk to me about supplements, that they're everywhere. Like, are they useful? Are they necessary?
I think the answer, annoyingly, like the answer to most immunological questions, is it depends.
Yeah.
I've done actually work around supplement formulations and stuff, and looking at the legal frameworks that we have in the UK for supplement labeling. So I feel like I can come from a different perspective from most people when I'm looking at supplements. In terms of the public health guidance in the UK and the sort of evidence base, like the diet should be the main source of nutrients to get us all our bases covered, except for vitamin D, where we have quite clear messaging that we should be supplementing from October to April in the UK. So we're recording this and it's January, and I suspect that a lot of people listening haven't been taking their vitamin D supplements over winter, in which case, if you went into winter with a just above sufficient level of vitamin D, you probably have half of that right now. So if you're struggling with some winter coughs and colds, or you feel like you've been in a cycle of viruses, then don't forget your vitamin D levels, because it's really, really important for the immune system. I think the trouble with vitamin D is that it was first discovered as something that's important for bone health. So we had very clearly defined amounts of how much vitamin D we need to take to look after our bones. And the role in immune health kind of came later, and we don't yet have a global consensus on what the optimal level is for immune health. So it's still a bit fuzzy. But I do think that that's one that everyone should have on their radar. But obviously vitamin D doesn't work on its own. It has a lot of cofactors, so you may have to make sure that you have adequate amounts of all the other essential nutrients that help vitamin D work in the body. And then you start to realize that it's all a big intricate web. So there's not really one supplement doing one thing. All of these are relying on each other, and all of these biological processes that are happening in the body will use multiple different nutrients. So aiming for the diet first, I think, with the exception of vitamin D, is what we should all be doing. I just think sometimes people, when they're spending money and there's a promise attached, it almost feels like you have that agency over your health. Or some people use it instead of working on their diet because they think, oh, that's easier. Yeah. And there's also, in terms of the immune system, there's specific nutrients that allow what we call authorized health claims. So vitamin C contributes to normal functioning of the immune system. So some supplements with a variety of different, maybe botanicals, vitamins and minerals, they'll add vitamin C at 15% of the NRV, the nutrient reference value, so that they're allowed to have that health claim on it. And once you put that authorized health claim, vitamin C contributes to normal function of the immune system, you can make more broader marketing statements around the role of vitamin C for the immune system. And I think that's, that's what companies are doing, and it can be misleading for the consumers, because you probably get lots of vitamin C if you're eating any amount of fruit and veg in your diet, so you don't need this supplement. But if you walk into a supermarket and orange doesn't have a label on it saying contains vitamin C, which contributes to a normal functioning immune system, so you go for the packet of supplements instead.
Yeah.
And I think also there's like a real disconnect between like what people realize is the like in the United States we have the RDA, the recommended daily allowance, and like what is in a supplement, right? Like, and there are many times where it's like whatever 150% of like your vitamin C allowance. It's like you only need 100%. Like the more is just more. Like it's not helpful like in any way.
Yeah.
It's a water soluble vitamin. Like I don't. What are we doing here? Like, and I use the example of like emergency of like it's like 1,000 milligrams of vitamin C. I'm like, okay, well the RDA is like 90 grams. Milligrams of vitamin C. It's like, what are you going to do with the other 910 milligrams of vitamin C that you're not using?
Yeah, no, on top of whatever you get from your diet as well. Right. Yeah, it's the lure of marketing, and I think the sort of placebo effect of, well, I've paid for it, so it must be doing something. I guess vitamins and minerals are kind of one example, but then you have all manner of fancy botanicals, and there I think the evidence base usually is quite muddied, and I think there may be a place for specific supplements for specific people. I think there's emerging evidence on things like creatine for immune function. And creatine's obviously been around a long time. It's kind of been, the territory of like the gym bro culture. But now we're seeing that move into different populations. There's evidence around menopausal health, cognitive function, immune health, or people who follow a plant-based diet and perhaps have lower dietary intakes of creatine. So it's kind of like it depends on your specific situation. I think when you are sick, sometimes we just want to throw everything at it, and that helps us feel better. And if that's what you want to do, then by all means, maybe there's some evidence that taking in more vitamin C and zinc can be helpful when you do get those symptoms of a cold or flu. Omega-3s are another one where if you're not eating oily fish, then it's recommended to take a supplement for that. So, and that's really important for the immune system. It's helping with that off switch for inflammation. So resolving inflammation at the end of an infection whenever you have unwanted inflammation or an inflammatory disease. So I think that's one that should maybe be on people's radar.
I mean, truly though, the basic guideline is like, you really, from my mind in the literature and part of the difficulty, like you mentioned, like the literature is really spotty because every study has like different dosages or different like lengths of like administration. And so it's really hard to compare studies, right? But like the general guideline, honestly, is like, if you are deficient, then it makes sense. If you are anemic, it makes sense to have an iron supplement. Of course it does. If you are pregnant and you take prenatal vitamins, sure. But like for most generally healthy people, you're probably fine.
Yeah. A lot of the time people don't know, like I'll speak to people who are taking like 10 different supplements and then they're just like, I actually don't know if any of them are working. And so it's kind of just getting them to rewind a little bit and like think about what was their motivation when they bought each one, and what was the expectation. And I think if there is an area of your health that you think a supplement can help with, then be really smart about it and do your own kind of N of 1 experiment where you're looking at the specific source of that nutrient that you want to take as a supplement. You're looking at maybe some reference point of what the right dose might be for the specific thing that you're dealing with. Also with botanicals, like looking on the endangered species list, rhodiola is a really key example. So we see rhodiola rose popping up a lot, particularly in sports and exercise, to enhance performance, but it's actually on the CITES endangered species list. So I think all of those rhodiola supplements, we're going to see the price rising as they're going to struggle to be able to obtain it. And so that's a real problem with botanicals that people don't often think to check, but you don't want to be part of a global problem of causing extinction to species. I think in terms of gut health, that's probably where we are seeing some benefits around specific probiotics to help deal with issues like irritable bowel syndrome, which affect a huge number of the adult population. I think we have a kind of fiber deficiency generally in the UK. That doesn't necessarily have to be a supplement, but just making sure that we're improving our fiber intake through our diet. And that's going to have a knock-on effect on your immune system. We know that increasing dietary fiber reduces the frequency of coughs and colds across the year. So the gut health element is really important to what's happening with your immune system more broadly outside of the gut.
So I was going to, while we had you on, I was going to ask about vaccines while we had an expert on immunology. But then I thought I'm just going to get angry about anti-vaxxers, and I'll probably end up saying something and getting myself into trouble. So I think we're going to leave that. For us. We're going to leave that one for another day, I think. This is the 80% Mental Podcast. I'm Dr. Pete Olusoga with Dr. Leah Washington. We're here with Dr. Jenna Macciochi and having a really, really wonderful conversation about all things immunology. Jenna, about this time in the podcast, because I know we haven't got a huge amount of time left, we feel like it's a good idea to get to know our guests a little bit better. So we've heard you talking about immunology, but I'd like to know a little bit more about you. So are you up for playing our little getting to know you game that I still don't have a name for?
Sure. Let's do it.
Okay, great. So we've got 4 virtual envelopes. We've got either or, have you ever, the last time, or deep and meaningful. And if you can choose a number between 1 and 4, I will virtually select one of these sets of questions.
Ooh, go for number 4.
Number 4. Okay. So what we've got deep and meaningful today.
Wow.
So are you prepared?
Sure. Hit me with it.
First one. Okay. Is what you're doing now what you always wanted to do growing up?
That is a deeply meaningful. I came from a tiny village in Scotland, and there's a lot of like rural poverty, and I grew up on a farm, and nobody ever really gave me any advice on careers. And I never really saw anyone from my community go and do anything other than the jobs that were around, like farming and those sorts of things. And my parents never had that opportunity to do any further education or higher education. So yeah, I feel like everything that's happened has been quite serendipitous because I was just curious about what lay beyond the horizon of where I grew up. And my school wasn't very helpful, and they basically said that they told my parents I shouldn't really try to, do something that was beyond me. Because I was kind of average in school, but I think I just hadn't found what I wanted to do. I was lucky enough to be of an age where it became more accessible for people to go to university. So I got that opportunity in the late 90s when they brought in the grant system and everything. There was more funding and things available. And I chose immunology because I was always fascinated about the human body and health and disease, and that just kind of seemed like a good fit. And I just had the most amazing mentors and lecturers at the University of Glasgow. So big shout out to those people at the Department for Immunology there. And everything else has just kind of evolved from that hunger for more knowledge, because it's such a new science that there's just so much more to learn. And I've just discovered that I love talking about it because it helped to untangle it in my mind as I was, sifting through the scientific literature. And then I started realizing that people were interested and engaged. So I never thought that I'd be sitting here right now. It's just been an amazing journey, and just now seeing what happens next. Who knows?
It's brilliant. It's funny. I was having this conversation the other day about the environment that you grow up in and the opportunities not only that are available to you, but just that you're aware of. Like like growing up in Gateshead, nobody ever told me that I could be like an investment banker.
Yeah,
like I didn't even know what that was, right? So,
yeah,
but there's just knowing what things are actually possible.
Yeah,
it's kind of opened so many opportunities and so many doors.
I think it's really. Sorry, I was going to say, I think it's really different for kids now because of the internet, because they can see people doing all sorts of jobs and making up their own jobs, and I think that's really very different to my childhood.
So, following on from the last question, then, what's something that you're most proud of?
My children. There has to be, Another thing that I always wanted to become a mother, but it's something that you don't necessarily know whether that will happen or not. But it's just given me such a sense of purpose, and they really inspire me. And I think somehow they have a lot of wisdom, and I find myself thinking, I just needed you to hear them say something or do something to sort of give me perspective. So 100%.
That's awesome. Something innocuous that annoys you just beyond belief.
Oh gosh. I don't know. My car, because I don't really like driving, and it broke down recently. I'm like a reluctant driver. I only learned a few years ago, and then now I have to drive for work, and I just need to get over it, really, because I'm making resistance there.
Leah, I want to get you here. I want to know what your pet annoyance is.
My pet annoyances.
Take your time.
People who don't know how to use escalators in an airport. I want to give
just in airports?
A tutorial. Well, that's where it really that's my peak irritation.
Okay.
Like escalators more broadly, for sure.
Right.
But when you're like heightened amount of stress, that's where really the rage seeps through, and when you don't know, and I'm in it maybe different of what side is what, but know where to stand and know where to walk. Allow people who can walk up the stairs to walk up the stairs. And if you want to stand on the escalator, that's fine. Just everybody do it on the same goddamn side. Can we just coordinate? We live in a society. What are we doing here?
Fair enough. I'm glad I asked.
Literally, I just want to do a brief 30-second tutorial, the beginning of the escalator. Please watch this so you know how to act.
Okay, I'm really glad I asked. Jenna, if you could tell your 15-year-old self one thing right now, what would that be?
Just to be bold and don't ever let other people put boundaries on you and what you can achieve.
I like this one. Not including your job. If you had to talk about one topic for 10 minutes straight with no preparation, what would that topic be?
I'd probably talk about mobility or movement or something around physical activity.
Leah, what's yours? Escalator etiquette.
Escalator etiquette. This is a really good question. I would probably talk about why sports are the best soap operas. And how it you think you know all the drama, but once you start to get to know all the players, girl, let me tell you, I got some You know all the friendships and the stories and the backstories. And if you want to get into sports, get into the drama, because you call me and I'll catch you up.
Mine would be why Reggie Miller is the best shooting guard ever to grace the NBA. Do not at me about this. Okay. Last one then, Jenna. What are you most thankful for?
Yeah, I guess just like to have the opportunity to do really diverse work. Like things, come in, and opportunities to work with people that, I could never have dreamed of. And so every day is different. And I love that diversity. And I think that it keeps things fresh and interesting for me. And very thankful for that.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for playing our getting to know you game, which I still don't have a name for. Really appreciate it. I feel like I've got to know you a bit better.
Brilliant.
Okay, so getting to the end now, again, keeping an eye on the clock here. Just as we're getting to the end, we've got a couple of questions left for you, if that's okay. Mm-hmm. One thing that I wanted to talk about earlier, but we didn't get around to, was breath work. And you've talked a lot on your social media about the benefits of breath work. And I just wonder if you could sort of briefly tell us a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of become fascinated with breath work when I realize something that is quite obvious, and that's that the breath is something that we can have both conscious and unconscious control over. And that really simple fact just kind of, I don't know, it was a watershed moment. Another fact that I found out about was that if you can breathe functionally, you can move functionally, because the diaphragm is this like big muscle, and it's connected to so many parts of your core structure. So we can train it like any other muscle. And if it's working properly, then that has an impact on your overall posture and how you move, because it's this central piece in your core. And so I had never thought of the diaphragm as a muscle. I never thought of breathing as being functional or dysfunctional. But then I guess it's kind of like eating, you can have a good diet or a bad diet. You get in good habits or bad habits. And if I'm sitting at my desk all day and I'm slumped over, you won't be breathing in a functional way. You won't be using all of the airspace properly. You won't be maximizing the gas exchange. And everything that our body does incurs a sort of energy cost. And breathing's no different. So if we breathe properly, and there's something called coherent breathing, which is kind of this 6 breaths per minute, then it's kind of the lowest energy cost for your body. And if we're breathing in a dysfunctional way, so we have more of a rapid breathing rate, it's a greater energy cost from our body, and that is sort of stealing energy away from other parts of our body. So if you were to do some physical activity at the end of a long day where you haven't been breathing optimally, you might feel extra tired because you're sort of stealing energy away from that. So if you think about, if breathing's something we can have conscious control of, or it means we can improve our breathing, we can improve that efficiency. And I was thinking at it from a personal level, like, if I want to run faster, run further, can I improve that efficiency? And then I started to look into more from the other side, so not the diaphragm, but from the nose, where we're taking the air into our body. We're meant to breathe through our nose, not our mouth. And that's important for our immune system, because the nose is acting like a filter. It's trying to get rid of any, not just viruses or bacteria, but also dirt and pollution and things that could damage that really delicate structure of our airways. Because, it's this if you've ever seen any histology of the lungs, it's this beautiful lacy structure. Those tiny air sacs at the bottom, they're 1 cell thick. They're maximizing gas exchange, but they're also really vulnerable. So we need to make sure that the air going into our airways is cleaned and warmed, and then there's less, things for your immune system in your lungs to deal with. So nasal breathing should be the kind of normal. And then if our nose is blocked because we have a cold, then we can switch to mouth breathing. as a short-term alternative, but it's not sort of ideal. And what we're seeing is lots of people with mouth breathing being linked to other issues. And one area that I was particularly interested in is children who are habitual mouth breathers. So if you notice that when your child's playing or sleeping or just, doing something where they're not aware that you're watching them, and notice if they are mouth breathing. And this is correlated with increased frequency of respiratory tract infections. And for any parents listening, the frequency of respiratory tract infections is quite important when you're a working parent, because it can feel like a never-ending cycle. So it's, then being able to work with a child to try and help them retrain how to breathe through their nose, or going for investigations, because it could be that they have really large tonsils and that there's a natural obstruction, and that's why they're not able to breathe comfortably through their nose. So they've switched to mouth breathing, and the problem is that then it's a habit again. They get so used to it that they can't revert back over time. And we see this with adults too, and mouth breathing is tracking alongside increases in blood pressure and sleep apnea and poor sleep quality, and then you get the sort of trickle down effect on other behaviors. So it just it's such a simple thing. Like, we all breathe, we all do it. You sort of think, how can we be doing it wrong? It's literally keeping us alive. But there's lots of ways that we can get into bad habits. And so my interest in breath work is really looking at that functional side. And then I guess that also then starts to tap into the parasympathetic and sympathetic nervous system, because we can use the breath to tap into feeling more relaxed, and things like, it consciously extending our exhale. It's giving more of a relaxing signal to the brain. So it is helping us maybe come back from a real stressful episode. And so all of these kind of mini tools, I feel like meditation's great, but it kind of requires practice, maybe some training, maybe some, coaching, whereas breathing exercises are a little bit more accessible. You can have them in your back pocket, and when something stressful happens at work, you can sort of go and do some specific breathing that helps bring you back to a good place. And I find that really appealing over some of the other techniques that felt like they needed a little bit more investment from me.
Yeah, and like you say, it comes back to that accessibility that we were talking about a little bit earlier as well. Last question then from me, and I'm going to quote back something that you wrote. You wrote, "A lot of doing is often the antithesis of what we actually need. We don't need to feel that nagging feeling that we should be doing more wellness practices, more supplements, just more. The truth of what your version of wellness looks like is often found when you cut through the noise and start by connecting with yourself and your needs." I love that. I think that's brilliant. But keeping that in mind and thinking about everything that we've talked about in the last hour and a half, if you had like a take-home message or a couple of like really key points for listeners, what would you say?
I think the take-home would be something around showing yourself some self-compassion. And this was, again, there's a paper where they taught people different self-compassion techniques. So it's kind of framed in three ways. It's sort of, there's a common humanity, the way that we speak to ourselves, just kind of being a bit more compassionate with ourselves. Over time, when people employ that, they actually see improvements in different parameters of their immune system when they take some empirical measurements. And I think, we talked a bit about habits and behaviors and the sort of psychological challenges to maybe doing the things we do to have a healthy immune system. And I think that when we look at how our lives are constructed and how there are so many challenging things, just being a bit more kind to ourselves, I find it has quite a profound impact. That little bit of self-compassion, instead of beating ourselves up because we didn't achieve what we set out to do, can actually be a little bit nicer way to sort of navigate these challenges. So if there was any take home for the listeners, it was to try and be a bit more compassionate with yourself.
Well, I think that is a marvelous place to wrap things up. And as a take home message, that's brilliant. But I mean, there's been so many like really interesting parts of this conversation that we've had today. So I really hope that our listeners get something out of it. And I just want to thank you so much for taking the time out of your day to come and chat with Leah and I.
No problem. Thank you so much for having me. It's been fab.
Leah, how are you doing?
I'm much better now than I was an hour ago. I gotta say, this morning was like rough.
Good. Well, we'll have to sort out your technical issues. See if we can sort that out. But to both of you, and especially to Jenna, thanks so much again for joining us. I really hope that our listeners get something out of it. What we'll do is we'll put your Instagram details and social media details in our episode description. So if people want to reach out to you, they can do. And do you want to give your books a quick plug?
Oh, yeah, I guess so.
Might as well.
It always feels a bit like shameless self-promotion. Yeah,
why not?
The first one
Show
is
yourself some compassion, Jenna.
I know.
Be kind to yourself.
I need to take my own medicine. Yeah, the first one is The Science of Staying Well, and the second one is The Blueprint for Strong Immunity.
Awesome. Well, we'll link to them in the episode description as well. So if you want to check out any of Jenna's work, then you can do that. If you've enjoyed what you've been listening to today, don't forget to give us a like, share, go and tell people how awesome the podcast is. You can follow us on social media at 80% Mental on Instagram and at EPM Podcast on Twitter. And in hindsight, I should have just given them the same handle. I don't know why I didn't do that, but whatever. Or you can go to the website, 80percentmental.com, where you can subscribe, listen to all of our other episodes, and make sure you don't miss out on any future amazing content. I've thoroughly enjoyed the conversation today, and I will see you next time. Well, I won't see you, though, because it's a podcast.
It's a podcast.
Although, do you know what? I've been thinking about this, and I've said this at the end of every episode for about the last 4 years now, and even if it weren't a podcast, like, I still wouldn't see the audience.
No.
So it doesn't even make sense. Whatever.
We'll workshop it.
Yeah.